Uh, so my name is Nachliel Selavan. This is the Isra Guide, so I'm sure you've heard the name Selavan before. And yes, I'm guilty as charged. I am one of them. This is a presentation that I've been doing. I did it once before virtually. It's very different than doing it in a museum. I generally do museum tours over the past 4 years. I've been guiding mostly at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but I've been traveling the United States and traveling the world and making very special Tanakh tours and Jewish history tours in museum, combining history, art, archaeology activities, and doing this for families and schools and institutions, organizations, and all that fun stuff. I've done a few such tours in the Israel Museum and Bible Lands Museum, including a couple tours aimed for tour guides and educators, because I think that there's something about museums that is generally missed. Museums, a tour guide once told me, a museum is something you do on the rainy day, when you can't go out bashetach, and I just show you the museum instead and just let the kids have fun. But I think that the museum can really be utilized because it has so much to show. And a main difference between being bashetach and in the museum is that being bashetach, you're limited to what you have there bashetach. And in the museum, you have collections of things from all over different places, even different parts of the world. And so you can really tell a story or show a development. So for example, doing a Tanakh tour in the Israel Museum is a very common thing to do. You can also do theme tours. So what I'm going to show you today is a theme tour, which I usually do only in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But because we now have Google Street View and Google Earth, we're able to do it with different parts of the world and different museums, which I've either visited or studied. And so you'll be able to get a real treat. Now this takes a little bit over an hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. And one of the ways to do that is I'm going to reference the source sheet, but I'm not going to go into so much detail. I'm just going to give you the overview. And the source sheet has more to look into. It also has my information, as does the slideshow, so you can find out more, follow me, look me up, be in touch. I'm happy to collaborate and work and help with whatever in any way I can. So let's get started. The four kingdoms, the Arba Malchuyot. There is a famous story which I brought also on page 1, which is a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And Nebuchadnezzar, in a very similar fashion to Paro with Yosef, he forgets everything when he wakes up, and he summons all of his advisors and sorcerers to try to figure out what his dream was. Now, unlike Paro, who remembered the dream but forgot its interpretation, Nebuchadnezzar forgot both the dream and the interpretation. And so he had, then one thing led to another, and Daniel was summoned to the court, and he was the one who was able to tell Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was and what its interpretation was. Amos is asking for the PDF. I really can't handle it as I'm presenting. Judy, if you can handle it, I'd appreciate that. Okay, so let's get straight into it. So Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now this tour is what it's doing is it's taking that dream, which has to do with the four kingdoms, the four major world powers that were including Nebuchadnezzar, which succeed him, and a few other ones until the arrival of Mashiach. That's basically the framework for what he's explaining it, as how he explains it to him. I'm going to focus specifically on the four kingdoms, which had a direct impact on Yerushalayim during the time of the Bet HaMikdash. That's what I'm going to be focusing on in honor of Yom Yerushalayim. So let's get started. So first of all, what was the dream? Very brief overview of what the dream was. And this picture from some Christian website, they have a lot of these artistic displays. They're very useful. So it shows you in Babylonian style archaeology, sort of a statue. And the statue is made up of different materials, starting from the head, moving downwards to the feet, gold, silver, copper, iron, and then the feet are a mixture of clay and iron, which of course don't mend naturally. And so basically everything sort of crumbles and falls apart. Okay, hang on, I'm going to upload the file here to the chat because I see that it's a lot of people. Okay, so just give me 1 second. 1 second. Okay, I have uploaded the PDF to the chat, and I hope that that's good for everyone. All right, so at the end of this dream, what happens is that a stone comes out of the heaven and smashes this statue into smithereens, and it's all destroyed and is blown away in the wind. Now, the image that I posted on page 1 is a 16th century German etching or illustrator who shows the picture of this statue in 16th century German style with a stone falling and knocking him down. But what's interesting is that while Daniel has this interpretation for Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he himself later on has his own vision of these four monsters coming out of the sea, and each monster has is a conglomerate of different other components of other monsters, different numbers of horns and eyes and all those, and teeth. So this whole monstrosity is a representation of the four malchuyot, the four kingdoms to come, which are of course alluded to also in the Psukim of Bereshit and different midrashim, Tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom, the opening verses of Bereshit, as a reference to the kingdoms which would rule Jerusalem. Okay, so that's the basic story, and here's what each one of them represents. Okay, so each one of these four elements of the king of this statue, according to the interpretation of many of the commentators, and there's some which are debatable, it starts from the top to the bottom. The head of gold, the Reisha de Dahava, is Babylon. The silver upper body is Persia. Copper, Nechoshet, the midsection, that is Greece. And the iron legs are Rome. That is what everyone is in agreement upon. The iron and clay feet is all kinds of future empires which fall apart and crumble. So the question of the identification is largely debated in the commentators, and it's not relevant to the temple in Jerusalem, so I'm keeping it out of the story. But just as an example, the split between the Eastern and Western Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, or the Ottoman Empire and the different divisions and so on of the Muslim dynasties and so on. So there's a lot of discussion about it. But what's at the end is the stone from heaven is Malchut Mashiach, is everything crumbles and falls apart. Now, the important thing about this, before I get into the Torah, is that all of these kingdoms interacted with us, with Am Yisrael, and left their impact on us in our cultural memory, in our identity, and in how we develop. For example, the encounter with Hellenism in Greece has an impact on Western society until today, and definitely on the Jewish people. We have Hanukkah, we have different forms of Socratic debate, for example, that we have in the Talmud and so on. So these things have left their marks, and my point is to kind of examine those, but most particularly from the point of view of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the owner of the dream. The dream represents, according to Nebuchadnezzar's perception of monarchy, of rulership, that each successive monarchy is ruling in a form of government which is weaker than his own perception of government. And so he is pure gold, gold being, eternal, pure, and that's how he considers rulership, is absolute control and dominion in iron grip, so to speak, right? And each next coming government, each coming form of government is weaker by his perception, and yet much more successful, and brings us a step closer to the development which allows for Mashiach, for Geulah, for the culmination of history. And so that's what I'd like to examine. Without further ado, I'm going to go straight into our map. Okay? All right. I just want to make sure that you can all see this, so you can all see the map. You can see Google Earth.
Yes, we see.
What?
Yes, we see it fine.
Okay, excellent. So this is, I'm also using Google Earth. Now, I just want you to know that I'm actually experimenting with this. Google Earth, it has a lot of very good educational tools that you can develop, and I'm practicing this right now. But just so you know that when you click between each location, it's going to zoom out and turn the globe. You might get a little bit dizzy, and I hope that's not going to be an issue. But we're going to get started right away. So zooming out the globe, I just also want to encourage you to explore this. So here is the area in which the four kingdoms are relevant. Here's tiny, tiny little Yehuda, the temple in Jerusalem. And then we have all of these mighty empires around us, which each had their turn to control the area. So in our period of time, which is towards the end of the first temple, until the destruction of the second temple, we have Iraq, Babylon. We have the Persian Empire. Here's Shushan and Persepolis, that's further east. And then we have the west. We have the Greeks. Here's the Pantheon, here's Athens, and then we have the Roman. There's the boot of it. So they're all those people who come and control this region. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to take you to the first place, and that is to the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. Now, we're going to pause right here. Okay, what you are looking at right now is one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the luxurious city of Babylon, which was built by Nebuchadnezzar II, who started the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He and his father Nebuchadnezzar. And so they conquered the world and were eventually conquered by Cyrus the Great, and so on and so forth. Now, the city of Babylon until today is a reference to luxury, to splendor, and that's what Babylon really was. Now, I want to point out this particular gate, which is on the northern part of Nebuchadnezzar, of Babylon and his palace. This gate, and you can see on the top right, is its reconstruction by our dear Saddam Hussein, who reconstructed it, seeing himself as a neo-Nebuchadnezzar. He even minted medallions, coins with him and Nebuchadnezzar. It's a very cool thing to know about. So this is the entry point into Babylon. Here's the river. You come into the port. It looked a little bit different back then. And we would come in, marched in this procession way into the Ishtar Gate, which was built in honor of the war goddess Ishtar, which is also where the word star comes from. Star and Ashtarta and Ashtaroth and Asherah, all those different names are different manifestation of that goddess in different cultures in the Near East. So this is how we were paraded in. Now, the important thing to note is that when we were brought into here, we were brought in as captives from the pride and rebellious Judea, which was destroyed, and we are now being resettled in Babylon. And this is how we walked in. Now, unfortunately for us, this area has been under suffered a lot of violence, and a lot of these things were destroyed. But luckily for us, these things were actually excavated and removed and are currently in the Pergamon Museum in Germany. So I hope you don't get too dizzy, but I want to take you into what we as captives, or our forefathers and our ancestors saw as they were led into captivity into Babylon. I want to show you what they saw with their own eyes. I hope you don't get too dizzy. We are going to Berlin. And here we are. Now, for those of you who are experimenting with this, and those who haven't, I encourage you to. This is Google Earth, but it's very similar to Google Street View. And this yellow character, which in this configuration is on the bottom right, if you click on him, every area that is available in Google Street View will show up as a long blue line. And every area, which is a 360 view, which is, you can't move right and left, you can just spin around, look up and down, is a blue dot. I happen to know exactly where I want to go, so I'm going to take you straight there. Otherwise, it might take a little bit of trial and error. We are going straight into the Ishtar Gates, which have been transported to Berlin. And we have now inadvertently hit one of those 360 views, but that's fine. Okay, just close that. Okay, so let's just look around. This is the 360, but it's also fine. You are looking at the reconstructed Ishtar Gates of Babylon. Now, when I say reconstructed, in the 1920s, after every big empire, the British, the French, everyone came and took the big discoveries that they found. There was a lot of rubble that was left and discovered by a German expedition. And we're talking about the 1920s, whereas Babylon began to be excavated even 100 years earlier, at the beginning of the 19th century. And so they found all of this debris, and they were able to keep it, and they brought it in bucket loads, shipped it all to Berlin, and it took many years and painstaking work to reconstruct this, and it's about 85% reconstructed. So you look at all these animals on the wall, and the blue brick, you can kind of tell what's new and what's old, but this was an excruciatingly difficult task to do, and there's an exhibition about it at ISAW, which is across the street from the Metropolitan Museum. It's an NYU museum, which ISAW stands for Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. So there's a lot about the making of it, and the making of the Ishtar Gate was like the epitome of craftsmanship at the time. Like, think of blue as lapis lazuli, as that precious stone that you can only get from Afghanistan. You're showing off blue and splendor. So let's look a little bit into this. There's a few interesting things here. Number one is a replica of the Hammurabi stela. Hammurabi, who was an Amorite, was the founder of the Babylonian kingdom, and so of the empire, which eventually developed into this, even though this is like 1,000 years before. So that's just important that it's here. The original is in the Louvre. Now let's look around at all of this beautifully reconstructed wall. There's palmettes here, there's lions, and the lions, the important part about the lions is that they extend to a long procession way. You can sort of see lions all the way along these light blue glazed panels. And it was really like several hundred meters long. We saw it, the original, in Iraq. And because we're stuck in the 360, I'm not going to waste more of your time moving out and in. We're just going to stay here. But the point is that you're seeing 120 of striding lions in this long procession way, which leads into your captivity, your new home, the mighty kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. So think about the impact of being paraded in here after having been schlepped from the destroyed Judea, and walked into here and seeing these lions all over you. Now, I want to point out why this is so important. First of all, let's go through these different animals. So from the top to the bottom, it's like I see I have a question, a comment. It's uploading now. Yes, it just took some time. The PDF is currently on the chat. Enjoy. I'm not talking about the texts yet, okay? So on the top here are bulls and these dragons called Mushu dragons. Now the bull, its name in English retains some of the original name where it came from. It's from Bel. You've heard of Babel, the gate of Bel, or Tziimi Babel Kiryat of Devel. There's a famous song. Belshazzar, the last king of Babylon. Bel is the thunder god, who the Canaanim, the Canaanites, called Baal. And that same thunder god is also Zeus for the Greeks. And in fact, Greeks who lived in the first and second century, in Phoenicia, in modern-day Lebanon, they actually called him Zeus Baal. So there was this recognition of the syncretic element of that's the same God expressed in a different culture. Now the thunder, imagine the rumbling, thunderous sounds that the angry bull makes. So if you're in the ancient world and you hear the bull, you think thunder. And so the bull was the manifestation of the thunder god, and that's how they saw it. The dragon is named Marduk. And if you wonder if you've heard something that sounds like Marduk before, well, yes, you have, because you can say that that's Mordechai's name, his court name, his if you will, his Gentile name, just like you have people called Bobby, but they can be called Yedidia in Hebrew, right? You have your English name. So he had his Babylonian name, Marduk. And Marduk is a very important deity in the Babylonian creation myth, which talks about how the world was formed, and Babylon was formed by Marduk out of the remnants of the old gods, which he destroyed in his battle. It's a fun story, but the important thing to recognize is that the dragon represents Marduk, so that's kind of cool. And finally, the lions, and I see that somebody here mentioned the lions of Judah being taken captive. Absolutely, that's exactly the point. And here I'd like to direct you to page 2, where we have a midrash which makes that comparison between the lion of Judah and the lions of Babylon. So Babylon is compared to a lion, and Judah is compared to a lion. And we have this form of poetic justice from a historic point of view, which is what this midrash is saying. Saying Bavel and Yehuda are both compared to a lion. Yehuda, we know there's the blessing of the tribe of Yehuda, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, and the lion is, of course, the symbol of Jerusalem's municipality. We have the lions, which were all over Jerusalem. A few years ago, I was involved with the restoration and preservation of the two in the old city for about 5 years. It's a lot of fun. And Babylon is referred to a lion in many ways. For example, in the later visions of these 4 kingdoms, Daniel sees a creature whose face is like a lion, and he understands that that is Babylon, right? Now, in addition to that, Babylon's downfall is heralded by the famous writing on the wall in the Feast of Belshazzar, which was interpreted by Daniel, who is of the tribe of Judah. So it's Judah announces the downfall of Babylon. So the lion, which is captures the lion has its downfall heralded by the lion. So there's this poetic justice. And the book of Daniel is full with references to lions. He gets thrown into the lion's den. He deals with the general whose name is Arioch, which means lion. There's a lot of interesting things going on there. But what I want to point out is just imagine captives of Judah, who are the proud lion of Judah, being paraded by the successful, powerful Nebuchadnezzar, who himself is decorating his palace with 120 lions. Just imagine the psychological impact that adds to that defeat, where your own symbol is, so to speak, being used against you. So one last thing about Nebuchadnezzar, and then we're going to move on to our next kingdom, is I would like to point out to you, this is the second source. I'm not doing every last thing on the page, but the second source is a song from Israel Najara, who's a 16th century poet who lived in Tzfat. And one of the songs that he wrote is called Kari Bon Olam. Yari Bon Olam, God the Lord of the world, is written in Aramaic. It's patterned along the book that refer to the book of Daniel, and I can't go into all the details. But one of them, which is really cool, is he says, God, to whom belongs splendor and glory, deliver your sheep from the mouth of the lion. Now that is the metaphor for the exile experience, which is really the theme of that song, which is how the Sabbath, Shabbat, helps us survive throughout all of the hardships of life because we have Shabbat. And so he compares that difficulty of being in exile to the sheep in the mouth of the lion, which is a very common phrase, but this is its source. And what I wanted to point out is that Babylon, the reason Babel is considered to be the archetype for how to deal with galut, with exile, with being displaced from your homeland, is because that was the first time we experienced it to that level, because the temple was finally destroyed for the first time and we are displaced. And so there's all of these elements put together to appreciate that Babylon is a major player. There's the line of Judah, the line of Babylon, but finally at the end we have the concept of being in exile as being sheep in the mouth of the lion. So that's a really, really cool concept. Now, one last thing before we move on is the concept of gold. And this is a metaphor I'm going to use throughout this discussion. Pure gold, okay, is the top of the pyramid. It's absolute control. It's an iron grip. It's absolute control over everything. That is the way Nebuchadnezzar envisions the way control over the world is done. And while he was right at the time, the fact is that the successive empires were much more successful in controlling a wider area because they had different ways of control. And according to his perception, that is weaker, which is why they are represented by weaker metals and weaker elements. And each one has a relationship to that particular way of thinking. So let's get onto it. I'm going to take you right now to the next kingdom. Hold on. We are going to the kingdom of Persia. And the kingdom of Persia, we're moving to page 3. We are going to talk about the Cyrus cylinder and the Cyrus proclamation. So here we go. We are now at the British Museum. Quite an amazing view that these things are actually available in 3D. I'm going to take you straight into the room that has the Cyrus cylinder. That is, let's move up. Okay. Okay, should be right here. Aha. We are right next to it. Okay, so here's what I do when you can't find the exact place. I hope you see I've switched maps, and I'm just going to British Museum. Okay, it's going to go straight there, not to waste any of your time, because I know exactly where it is. And Google Earth has much better tools for finding what you need to find. Okay. Forgive me for this delay. We will be right there. Okay. On. Yeah, I appreciate your patience. This usually is much faster. I'm just stuck in the wrong part of the hallway, that's all. It's really close. Okay. Yeah, I wish we could go through. This is actually Greece. Like, we can actually have fun and go through Greece right now, but that's really not where we're holding. Okay, let's take a look. Oh, that's why. I'm at the wrong side of the hallway. Okay, my bad. No, is it the wrong place? Here we are. I'm at the diametric opposite of where I was standing. That's totally fine. Here we are. Wonderful. Okay, so straight ahead of us, stuck behind the wall. Ah, okay. There it is, the Cyrus cylinder, the first edict of human rights. And thank you for your patience. Now, the Cyrus cylinder is very famous. First of all, one second. Someone came late. If somebody can help them out. Okay. So.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
We can't. Can you resend it again? Send the link again. We can't send it to them.
It's not a link. I actually posted the actual file on the chat. Okay. All right. So here's the Cyrus cylinder. It's very, very small. I'm sure some of you have been to the British Museum and seen it. Now, this very small discovery is so important because what it does is it shows us a very similar record to the end of Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles, and the beginning of the book of Ezra, which talks about the proclamation that Cyrus the Great makes upon his ascension to the throne. And so that is brought on page 3. Okay, so, So this is the first year of Koresh, the king of Paras. What he does is he makes a proclamation that allows all of the Judeans who were captive in Babylon to go back to Yerushalayim, to Judah, and to restore their kingdom, their temple, and the government's going to pay for it. Now, we don't have the exact copy of that here. We have basically a similar policy which allows people who were displaced by the former Babylonian Empire to go back and rebuild their centers of worship, and the government's going to pay for it. So this is really an example of the policy which was much more lenient of the Persian Empire. So talking about moving down that scale of metals, of forms of government, this is a very good example of it, and we're going to see more examples. Now, our first encounter with the Persian Empire during the year really is Purim, of course, and the Purim, of course, talks about a big feast and the banquet in Shushan, which we're actually going to go and visit soon, the banquet hall, the Apadana. But these are the kind of vessels that they use. Now, these many bountiful silver and gold vessels are typical of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, as it is called. And they were so abundant that the legend says that they didn't even bother washing the dishes. They just tossed it out and brought in more. Now, they would give these gifts to dignitaries who would come to visit the palace, right? Everyone's coming from their different country, and you want to impress these guests, and kirtzon ish va'ish, to please everybody's whim, as it goes in the Megillah. And these two vessels right over here, I just want you to appreciate, always come in pairs. And the reason for that, let me just get a better angle on it. The reason for that is that it is the way you would drink wine in a feast. Now, this cup over here ends with an extremity of an ibex or a ram. They also have lions and leopards and all these different animals and bulls that end at the extremity of this cup. Now, how do you drink out of this cup? Imagine you're right now sitting in the Persian banquet hall. You're not sitting down on a chair like we are now. You're actually reclining to your right as you would on Leila Seder on Pesach or in the Greek symposium. You're reclining, so everything that you hold is a little bit different. This raiton would actually shoot wine out of a little hole, which is between the legs of this creature, or whatever, or the mouth of the lion, or whatever the animal is in the extremity, and it shoots into this lightly curved bowl, which is called a fiali. And you would drink actually out of the fiali, dipping it into your mouth, and the wine breathes, decants, and all of that. So these two always come together, and they would be given as gifts to dignitaries. So you're seeing stuff which actually relates to it. Now, scenes of lions and bulls is a lot of fun stuff, but I want to take you to the next place, and that is to the palace of Shushan. So I hope you're not getting too dizzy, but we're going to be going straight to Shushan. And I'm going to show you some cool stuff about the palace. Okay. So here we are, Shushan, or as it's called today, Shush. And there's the modern city around it. I hope you just thumbs up if you can see this. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so this upper area is actually a hilltop, or what's called in archaeological terms a tel, as you know. And this is where the palace was found. Okay, you're looking right now at the remains. Here's just this small little hilltop. And this outline, this architectural floor plan shows you the remain from the palace in Shushan. And we're hopefully soon going to see a much better preserved one in Persepolis, further to the southeast. Now, this is, first of all, I'm sure you're familiar with Rabbi Yehuda Landi. He came out with a book called Purim in the Persian Empire, where he actually lays out the whole story in each, and he shows you on the map where each story happened in this room as best as we know it. So this is really, really cool. not only the things that we found, the physical items like weapons and dishes and so on, but we also have the actual palace. So this entrance area called the Apadana, or in Daniel it's called Apadana as well, Apadano, etc., has 36 pillar bases. Some of the pillars are still standing in some of the other palaces. They were destroyed by Alexander the Great 2,300 years ago. Now this was the banquet hall, but this whole thing is about half a kilometer long. So it's a massive palace. And I just want us to understand that when we have a palace, a party, which is in the second source on page 3, but that's the beginning of Megillat Esther, Yamim Rabim Shmonim U'Ma'at Yom, 180 days, that is half a year. So for such a long time, like how do you keep people involved and entertained? What's going on? Well, you need a very big palace, of course. Now, before we go into another palace, I just want to point out, you see how this is a hilltop. If we go through the psukim, through the verses in Megillat Esther, you'll notice that there's two things that are called Shushan. There's Shushan HaBira, and there's Ha'ir Shushan. Those are two different things. Bira in ancient Mesopotamian, but also in Akkadian, but also in Hebrew, actually means fortress, right? It means fortress. So the fortress on the top is Shushan HaBira, and the bottom is Ha'ir Shushan. I just think a question. Will you be able to access what's in the chat later? That's something you have to ask Judy. I believe that it can be saved and sent. You can always contact me if you have particular questions. Okay, so this is Shushan. Now our next stop, hope you don't get dizzy, we're going a little further to the southeast. This is a very similar city called Persepolis. And Parsa is what Persia, Parsa or Farsa was actually called at the time. And the Greeks called this Persia city, Persepolis. Now there's a lot to see here, but you're looking right now at the remains of a massive palace in Persepolis. And the difference between Shushan and Persepolis is the street view. So I want to take you in just to see a little bit of it. See what it's like to walk into the palace of Shushan, even though we need to use our imagination. Look at this. Just looking around. A little slower, a little slower. Ah, what just happened? I don't know what's going on. Okay, I want to show you one last part here. I want to show you the massive pillars. Let's go here. And you can always do this on your own. There's so much to see here. Look at the height of those pillars, which are over 100 meters away. And look how tall they are. And the fact that they're still standing is a testament to the power and grandeur of this palace. It's really fascinating. There's a lot of ghosts walking through here too. Okay. So this is just a little bit of it, of course. You can spend a long time here, but I want you to appreciate really how massive this palace was. Right? It's really incredible and moving. But that's Persia. Now, to wrap up Persia before we move on to Greece, so in terms of the metaphor of the metal, we have gold, which is the top of the statue, top of the pyramid, absolute control, iron fist, and then you move down to a kingdom, which first of all has this aspect of a lot more religious freedom, right? And you can say, yeah, they were very liberal, or you can say, if you want to rule such a massive empire, you got to pick your battles, because you want people to be happy and you want people to pay their taxes. So you give them the religious freedom, and they will go with you a lot more, because that's the sensitive issues, right? But we also have many different finds, like those vessels that I showed you, which have several different languages on them. I want to take you to one more museum, which shows you just examples of some of these finds. Why are you going to take me to the Pergamon Museum? I want to go to Chicago. Let's go to Chicago. Forgive the blurriness. You might get really dizzy right now. Oh my gosh, what is going on? Oh, this is ridiculous. Okay. Let's go to Chicago. So the Oriental Institute of Chicago will show us one more thing, which I think is important for us to understand about the Persian Empire, which is going to help us wrap up this concept of their multiculturalism. You see questions? Well, I'm glad Tovasal is used to this stuff, so. Yeah, this doesn't make you dizzy. You know the Rova. Okay, so we are now in a room. Hold on. It's taking some time to download it. It's right here. I just can't walk into it. There you go. So this is one room of the Oriental Institute of Chicago. Now, a thing or two about the Oriental Institute of Chicago. The University of Chicago had a department which dealt with biblical archaeology, all right, which many of the universities in the 1900s did. and they had these excavations. The Oriental Institute was founded, was predicated on the assumption, on the understanding that Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is what they called at the time Orientalist or Oriental, or basically we'd say Eastern or Semitic as opposed to Western. And so even though the New Testament, which is really the Bible for these people, was included also, Corinthians and so on, the Greco and the Roman world, they left that out and they capped it at Persia, because in order to understand Tanakh, you need to understand the Eastern cultures more than the Western ones. So it's an interesting idea. But this is a very good place to find these things. So just a couple of things I'm going to show you really briefly, other than this standing bull, which is from Persepolis, two of massive bulls at the entrance to what's called the Hall of 100 pillars or columns, right? It's part of the finds that are there, but I want to show you a dedication inscription, a foundation deposit, which was at the bottom of a palace in Shushan, right here, which belongs to King Xerxes, which is our English pronunciation of the Greek Churchursh, which is most likely Achashverosh or Achshayarsha. So this is written in 3 or 4 different languages in the cuneiform script. If I would be able to show you the Met, which doesn't have these things available online, this part, you'd also see alabaster jars that say Xerxes, the great king, in 3 languages, in ancient Elamite, Persian, Akkadian, and Aramaic, and in hieroglyphics. So when you talk about the Persian Empire and you read about them, in Megillat Esther, you see that they have Medina Medina Kichtava, Ve'am Kilshono. Okay? You have every language and its nation according to their language. Whereas Nebuchadnezzar was everyone needs to speak Aramaic. In the Persian Empire, it's like, we are going to cater to you. We're going to have multilingual platforms and information so that anyone can understand us and access it. We will cater to you. And so sliding down the statue, we have an empire who has a broader grip, but they're doing it through being multicultural and more accepting towards other religions and so on. So it's a very interesting thing that we have about Persia. And on that note, we are going to move on to their conquerors from Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. So I'm moving you now to one of the highlights of this trip. You are in for a big treat. Okay. Where'd it go? Where did it go? Pantheon. Take us there. Here we go. All right. The moment we've all been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen. This is so much fun. Look at this. The Parthenon in 3D. Look at that. If you've ever been, the Acropolis, this is prime real estate of the ancient world. 2,500 years ago, this was the best real estate in the world. Look at the size of this thing and how tall it is and protected. Now, the Greek Empire. Now, the Greek Empire is the spreader of the Hellenistic culture, starting from Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great, and with Alexander's conquering of the Persian Empire, he spread Hellenism throughout the world. Now, that concept of spreading Hellenism was actually continued by the Romans, who saw themselves as the protectors of Hellenism itself. Because after the Romans defeated the Greeks, and we're talking about like the year in the beginning of the 1st century BCE, right? The Greeks actually defeated the Roman culture, and so the Romans became Hellenized, and the rest of the world became Hellenized, and a lot of these Hellenistic values are important to us until today. And so this is a culture which had a tremendous amount of impact on the Jewish people and on the development of the world. And I wanted to show you one example. So before we go into the Parthenon itself, let's zoom out and see how many theaters and gymnasiums, ancient and modern, do we see. First of all, you can see this amphitheater. This is a place for sports, for display, for theater, right? It's a major part. There's one of these is the Theater of Dionysius. It's one of these massive, like these sites to see when you get to Greece. Here's another one, an amphitheater. Let's zoom out a little bit and see a few more of them. Here's another racetrack for these games that they would have, competitions. And there's also some new ones right next to it. Here's some tennis courts and some kind of running court or something. And there's more and more of these. We know that the ancient Greeks invented this concept of institutionalized competition, competing for glory. which every 4 years they would compete in order to honor the Olympic gods at Mount Olympus. And so they called these games the Olympic Games. And they had this pace of every 4 years was an Olympiad, just like we have Lahavdil, we have every 7 years a sabbatical, a Shemitah, right? So they had their way of counting these Olympics every 4 years. So the Olympics were a very important part of Greek culture, which you can imagine being a surprise and a shock to a culture which is very, let's say, studious and involved with scholarship and so on and sort of insular. And suddenly we have like sports and public games, like that's what you do in public, not like studying and like, what is this, right? It's a different thing. It's entertainment, it's fun, it's exciting, and it's tempting and all that stuff. And it's really part of Western society today. That's a big part of it. So that was one of their main impacts on Western culture. But let's look further into it. Let's just look at the architecture. Now, we're in Jerusalem, so we see this a lot less. But I was working in New York in museums for 4 years, and a lot of museums, including the British Museum and many buildings in the United States, are built along these architectural ideas where there's 3 different types of basic column capitals. There's Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. You know, they develop, the more syllables you add, the later they are. So Doric was the most basic one. Ionic is later, and then Corinthian is later. It's like all out with no apologetics, just decorative flowers and stuff and faces and whatever in the top of the capital. But this architecture is first of all, it was revived in the Renaissance, right, in the 16th century. But in addition to that, this has conquered the world. Like architecture, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic architecture is found around the world. So it really had an impact. And this is a very important thing to recognize. The Greeks were very, very successful in purveying their culture in many different ways. And I'll talk about a few more as well. And in order to do that, I'm going to go on to one last museum about the Greeks, which is the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Boston MFA. It's one of my favorite museums. And I don't know why it's zooming in every time we're doing this to the ocean. Okay, we are leaving Europe, ladies and gentlemen. We are in New England. All right, here we are at the Boston MFA. Let's get a look at it. And now that we've mentioned the Greco-Roman architecture, you'll be able to appreciate what we're seeing, which is very common of Western museums. An entrance sort of like the Parthenon. Here's the Doric capitals. That's what you call the very simple ones, the Doric capitals. Let's go straight into the Greek world. Boom. Let's hope we get into the right floor. The interesting thing about Google Earth as opposed to Google Maps is that on Google Maps, you can control which floor you're at and you can sort of jump up and down. In Google Earth, you're just stuck wherever you're stuck. So we are right now inside an exhibit which is called Daily Life in Ancient Greece at the Boston MFA. I am warning you that if you go there with kids, you need to be very careful what they see, because there's some stuff which I would say is uncensored. But I'm being very serious. You want to know what you're doing when you go into this museum. But it's got a lot of good stuff. Here's some very interesting and important components of Greek culture which are part of Western society. So let's talk about, here we go, comedy. So what just happened? We are having a rebellion. Okay. The technology is revolting against us. We're using it for education. Okay, so comedy. Now, comedy today, of course, I mean, especially now, I mean, you know, the jokes that are going around about how we are dealing with the coronavirus with black humor. You know, there's this thing called a meme. I'm sure you're familiar. This picture with the title with a kid talking to his grandfather and asking, so grandpa, you lived during the corona. Was that a bad time? So he said, well, for people, yes, but for comedy, it was a great time, right? The concept of dealing with tragedy through comedy was basically an invention of the Greek culture. And it, of course, is part of our society until today. And you have these little theater masks and all kinds of stuff, which would decorate a house, or you put them on, you'd go to the theater, you dress up. And the comedy was a very important part of their culture. And they use it to decorate it on these vases. Now, these are household vases. If you imagine these things throughout your house, and they have pictures of all of these things on them, and you ask yourself, what is the point of doing that? It's kind of like the role of comic books. It's telling stories that you want the kids to connect to. You want to raise your kids on these cultural references. So you'll have the Olympics, you have Heracles, which the Romans called Hercules, and so on and so forth. You have all the important stuff on household vessels. Let's take a look at a few more of them. So my computer's going crazy. Okay. Sophocles. So these are stuff that we learn in the liberal arts. You learn it in English studies. So you learn about tragedy. Sophocles is one of the very famous tragedy writers. There's a few more. There's Aeschylus. There's, was that Parmenides? Was that at the end? Or Euripides? You know, as the famous joke goes, Euripides? Euripides? Yes. Eumenides? Yes. You know, the tailor is being given the ripped piece of plant. Euripides? Eumenides? So whatever. Not so funny. Okay, so here's these stories. All these stories are described on vessels. And just so you understand, what is the role of this? Like, we see this a lot, right? We see a lot of Greek stuff and images and pictures that are on vessels. And you're like, what's the big deal? And I hope that you, if you're familiar with it, that's great. And if not, I hope that encourages you when you go and look at this stuff, even in that small, modest collection in the Israel Museum, you'll wonder, what is the picture about? What is its role? What does it play? There's an exhibit here at the end of the hall which shows you the entire Trojan Wars from the Iliad described in household vessels. This was a very important story. Think about it like this. You're sitting at the Shabbat table Friday night with your kids, right? And they brought back their parsha sheet, that little sheet they got from school, and you're starting a conversation then. What did you learn about in the parsha? What did you learn about with your kids? Well, here you have a Greek family sitting around the table, around their, you know, the simple whatever, they're laying down and reclining. And little Asclepius is being tested on on the 10 labors of Heracles, right? What did you learn from them, and who did he fight, and what did he do? These are conversation starters. So it's important to look at these Greek artifacts and understand what they're doing, what is their role, what is the story that they're telling, and what are the values that they're transmitting with them. And on that note, I'm just going to move to one last thing, which is a quote on our page, which is dedicated to the Greeks, which is page 4. And again, I'm doing this, I'm trying not to rush it, but I don't want to take too much of your time. We just hit an hour. There's 3 sources I'm going to read to you from the middle. The first is from Homer, which has to do with the Olympics and their games. Right? There is no greater glory for a man as long as he lives than that which he wins with his own hands and feet. This concept of fighting for glory is a very noble one, which we can appreciate it in Western culture. We appreciate it today. We encourage kids to play sports and so on. But what is the point? Is the point to win and to defeat the other? Or is the point to express yourself, right? And that's where we really have a deep difference between the Greek culture, which is more about the best of the best of the best, whereas in Jewish culture, it's more about expressing your unique individuality, which is what Hanukkah was really about. It's your unique individual expression, even if you're not going to win. We didn't care about winning. We happen to have won. That wasn't the point, right? So we have this concept. So this was a concept of competing was really to the astonishment of the Persians, which is recorded in Herodotus' Persian Wars. He goes, "Good heavens," explained a Persian soldier to his commander, "what kind of men are these against whom you have brought us to battle? Men who compete with each other for naught but glory?" Right? So what is this thing with competing? This was a concept which the Greeks invented. So that's really cool. The one last thing I want to share, which has to do with our vision in Daniel, is the concept of democracy, right? Think about forms of government. Absolute control. Everyone speaks the same language, etc. Absolute control, but we're going to let you speak different languages and we're going to help you with your religious institutions. You move down to democracy. And Pericles says, our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands, not of a minority, but of the whole people. Now, we all know that the democracy of the Greeks was far from perfect, far from perfect. The democracy of the Greeks was only males, not females, and only males who are estate owners and so on, not if you were a foreign worker or a slave. So it's not exactly a democracy, but it's a push in the right direction, right? It laid the foundation for what we have today. If the ancient Greeks would have seen our democracy, they'd say, that's an oligarchy. That's the control of the few over the many. But when you have so many people, you need to appoint officials who will represent you to stand there in those meetings all day because you don't have the time to do that. But this was a good start. So in terms of Nebuchadnezzar's concept, this is further down. This is copper. This is bronze, right? So that's the Greeks. And on this note, I'm going to take us to the museum I'm sure we're all familiar with, the Israel Museum. And here we're going to talk about our final one, Rome. Let's hope that we don't get too dizzy getting to there. Okay. The Israel Museum, Muzeon Israel. We're going straight to the Roman galleries. Okay. Google Street View isn't the best here, but here we go. Let's hope I remember where it is. Boom. And if not, I'm going to do my plan B and just jump to the other map. Okay, we're not far from them. We are currently at Tel Rehov. Here's the Assyrians. Okay, wonderful. We're like a 2-second walk away from them. Okay. Mark up the stairs. Okay. Perfect. We are right where we need to be. Now, for those of you who have been recently, and by recently I mean in the past 10 years in the Israel Museum, this was filmed in 2011. So things have changed a lot. You don't have the tomb of Herod over here, and you can kind of get a glimpse into the past. Things look a little bit different. You have the Masada bathhouse, you have some of the regular stuff. That's fine. But I would like to take you straight to some important aspects about Rome. So let's move straight in, past all of this stuff. We're going to go straight to Vespasian. So you're all tour guides in Israel. I don't think I need to cover this with you. You all know this stuff, Bet Atkiya Lachriz and the Soreg inscription. Here in the back is also a piece from the pillar from the Stoa in the southern part of the Temple Mount. Like, this is all cool stuff. You know this stuff, so I don't want to take too much of your time here. Let's move into stuff that specifically relate to the character of the Roman Empire as described in the vision and so on. Okay. Nice. Let's start right over here. Second. Further. This stuff from Caesarea. So you see in the background here is the aqueduct in Caesarea, which was renovated by the great builder, one of the 5 great emperors, who was, of course, Hadrian, Hadrianus Caesar. We call him Shchik Atzamot Hadrianus, like may his bones be ground to dust. But he did a lot of building, and he was dragged
turn
in
on
here.
screen share.
I thought
Turn
it's
on screen share.
It's not on screen share? Try again. Can you see it?
It
I
is
see
on
it.
screen share. We can see it.
I can see
people can see it, then it's working on their end. Okay? Okay, so what I wanted to...
Seeing it. No problem seeing it. I can see it.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to begin our tour of the Roman part with the famous line from Monty Python, Life of Brian. What have the Romans ever done for us? Right? Well, one of the things they did, of course, was having a drainage system and an aqueduct. And this inscription over here by Herod has to do is the reconstruction of the Herodian aqueduct by Hadrian. And this is an inscription talking about the fact that he did it, right? So the Romans did these kinds of things. They had infrastructure, right? And so that's going to be an introduction to the Romans, who are an army, who are a conquering army, but they were also a builder army. And they built a lot of things in Jerusalem. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So on our 4th page, that is our 5th page, we have the introduction of Rome. And here I introduce it with the question, brothers or enemies? So we know that we consider Rome to be an extension, a descendant of Esav, who's the brother of Yaakov. And they had a very complex relationship. On the one hand, Esav gave up his right to be the firstborn, those rights, because he just wanted that red lentil soup, right? That's why he was called Edom, like big red, because of his desire for instant gratification, which is going to be something we're going to talk about very soon with a little surprise I have for you at the end. But their interrelationship is very interesting, because at first Esav wants to kill his brother Yaakov, but then he says, let's walk together. And Yaakov rejects that and said, why don't you pass ahead before me? And those are the verses that I brought. Now, the 4th empire being considered iron, the legs of iron, as Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar, the 4th kingdom will be strong as iron. And the Roman Empire were indeed powerful, very powerful with the first professional army. Now, the Roman army were also builders that we'll talk about, but I want to just mention the blessing that Yaakov gives to Esav, which is Al Charbecha Tichyeh, you shall live by your sword. Their definition is a conquering iron fist, ironclad, kingdom, right? They conquer, they fight, it's about the sword. So let's talk about that a little bit, about what they do. We have their warfare, and here's some incredible finds that were found, if I'm not mistaken, by some farmer. I don't remember the exact story, but this chain of mail was found wrapped up inside this helmet, which is one of the, by the way, the only intact pieces in the best condition in the world that have been found, if I'm not mistaken. There's arrowheads, a lot of this Roman warfare stuff that has been found. It's really incredible that what it has been found. A part of the Roman pagan worship involved, they even had stuff that they would take with them as soldiers on them in order to serve their gods and have protection. They had these different amulets and little statues that they worship, and they had these shovels, these incense burners, and so on. Keep those incense burners in mind, because they're very, very important, right? You're going to be surprised where you find them, and if you do know, well, it's even better. Now, this is a stone from also a building, a station in which they were Roman builders, and this was excavated these shingles, ra'afim, were found near Binyanei Ha'umah in a Roman building station, a military building station, which was excavated by Michael Aviona, right near Binyanei Ha'umah. And this was an example of what the Romans did, because when the Romans were at war, you're at war. But what do you do in times of peace? Well, you're paying the Romans a lot of money. They're professional soldiers. You use them to make roads, to put in the milestones, to do all of that stuff, right? So they're building stuff. And of course, they stamp things with the 10th Legion, Legio Ex Fretensis, with their stamp in order that they shouldn't be, used, copyright stuff, right? Copyright infringement. So they had all these things with the stamp of the 10th Legion, which had either a bull or the pig. And if you wonder kind of why the pig is a reference to Esav, you can imagine that the presence of Roman Jerusalem in the 10th Legion, with the symbol as the pig, was not so favorable to the Jews at the time, right? Let's take a look at this stone here from a building station. On the top, you have Legion, Legio Ex Fretensis, and the cohort 11X, cohort 8. So you have the 8th cohort and the 10th Legion together stationed and building stuff. So you have a people who build or are industrious in conquering. Now we fought against them, and of course we were successful for a short time. We have all of the first revolt, the great Jewish wars, Jewish-Roman wars, Churban Bayit Sheni here on the side. You're familiar with them. There's a lot of Bar Kokhba coins. And here's our dear Hadrianos Caesar, which was found also, if I'm not mistaken, by a farmer, right? And somewhere probably to demark the victory. We were also, our victory, the victory of Hadrian over the Jews was also celebrated with an archway, which talks about it, which was found here in Tel Shalem. And there's the story of it over here. This is sort of a reconstruction. We didn't find the whole thing, but this would probably be in an archway. So you have that over here talking about the destruction of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So that was a very, very big deal. And putting aside the Gallus revolt of the Jews in the year 300 something, we pretty much didn't revolt against the Romans. It was pretty much over for that, right? We sort of changed to a different mode of working. Don't rebel against the Romans and so on. Let's take a look just at some stuff that have been found. We have some comments. Okay. These things were found also in the Bar Kokhba caves near Ein Gedi, Nachal Chever. And I want you just to look at a few things. So the Jews were carrying with them weapons. Here's a water skin. We found, of course, some of the Bar Kokhba letters that Yigael Yadin published in the 60s. A lot of very interesting things. But I want to just point out some things that we've seen before. Look at this Roman incense shovel, which has on it all of the pagan symbols. Now, these people who were rebelling against the Romans presumably were pretty religious Jews. Right? We find the Bar Kokhba letters talking about supplying the Arba Minim for them and so on. And here they are using this Roman stuff. So their standards of what's kosher and what's not, so to speak, are probably not as the way we thought about them, because these are valuables that they simply used. Sometimes they would actually scrape off the face of something, but not necessarily. So I've seen this fairly recently, right? It's just there. And even a doorknob. This is a key knob or something like that. They just locked their door and took the key with them. A lot of cool stuff. So that's that. Now, one more stop, and then we have one little surprise for the end. You all know the Bar Kokhba coins. This is found in Beit Shan, some particular emperor. Something really cool about Hadrian, Hadrianos Caesar. So this statue of Hadrian, which is presumably also colorful as things were at the time, shows you a portrait of Hadrian. Now, the beautiful thing about this portrait is how accurate it is. And I read about this in a recent exhibit at the Met called The World Between Empires. Hadrian died of a particular heart disease. And that heart disease had a symptom which curls your ears inward in a certain kind of way. And if you look closely at his ears, you'll be able to see that they're curled inward that way. In other words, the portrait was made really showing him one-to-one. This is a very good representation of him. It's kind of cool how the Romans did this portraiture stuff, okay? So now before we wrap up, I want to take you to one last place, and that is the way, as my Abba taught me this, how do you look at the Roman world today, the Western culture with that concept of Edom, red, and instant gratification? Well, Coca-Cola, it's red, and you can find it everywhere, right? So this is the world of Coke in Atlanta, where my mother is from. So I have visited this museum. And there's one room in this museum, which I hope I'll be able to find at the immediate drop, and I might not, is a room where you can taste every flavor of Coca-Cola from around the world. Let's see where it takes us. We might get lucky, we might not. Either way, it's totally fine. Everything here is red. It's just an amazing museum. It's all about the history of Coca-Cola. You see machines, the vaults, they have Coca-Cola art, who knows, all that different stuff. Okay, I'm gonna take you to the world of Coke through Google Maps because that's a better way to get into it. World of Coca-Cola. World of Coca-Cola, and let's give it a shot. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the World of Coke, I hope you get to visit this museum. It's a really fun museum. I don't remember if I got to drink a lot of Coke because most of it wasn't kosher. But here's the beautiful thing about Coke. Yeah, here we are. Taste it. So in this room, they have these pillars in the middle of each room. Here's Latin America, Asia, South America. You have special flavors that you can only get in different countries. Like they have a honey flavor in Japan. I wish I could taste it. But if you go to the desk here, it'll give you the list of what's kosher. And I'm sorry to disappoint, but the ones that are kosher are just this at the end, which is the Coke in America, which you can get anyway if you're going to this museum. So you don't get to taste any of it. But the fun thing about this is the concept that Esav is all about instant gratification. In a sense, there's an aspect in Western culture, which is, I want it to be here, now, and available and easy, right? Like Sesame Street. Everything, learning is going to be fun. And what about when it's not fun? Right? But this concept that everything needs to come to you easily. The concept of red, as my father said it to me, is like, it's red, right? So that's Esav, and it's everywhere you go, there's Coca-Cola. That's their branding. Anywhere you go, you got it. This is Coca-Cola. My art teacher, Sylvia Baram, in the Old City, her husband refuses to drink Coke because their commercial in Hebrew was Ta'am HaChaim Coca-Cola. It's like the flavor of life is Coca-Cola. So on principle, he wouldn't drink it. But anyway, so this is kind of to wrap it up. So to really wrap it up, the concept of Esav, of this pushing Hellenism forward, but with a different attitude, I just want to add one detail, and this is at the bottom of the page. I have a list of desire within arm's reach. Yes, Coca-Cola. Thank you, Abba. So I have a list of 6 different Roman emperors which have had impact on us. I'm only going to talk about the last one, okay? So we have Vespasian and Titus, of course. We know them from the destruction of the temple. Hadrian from the Bar Kokhba revolt. And then Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, and Caracalla fit into the famous conversation of Rebbe's friendship with the emperor, with Antoninus. And the question is, who was this Antoninus? And to make a long story short, there were many emperors which were called Antoninus. Antoninus Pius was one of several of the Antonine dynasty, which was eventually destroyed by the next dynasty, the Severan dynasty, and we have Caracalla, who is from that dynasty. But he also had the name Antoninus. Now, Michaela, Viona, and others will tell you that if there was an actual person named Antoninus, it must have been the one called Caracalla, who was only called Caracalla after he died because of that German military garb that he wears called a Caracalla, right? So he was probably the guy. But why is he important to us? Because in terms of the vision of Nebuchadnezzar about how to rule, he took democracy a step further, and he issued the Edict of Citizenship in the year 212 of the Common Era. Citizenship means that everyone can become a citizen, and of course pay taxes, very convenient. But that means that we're moving further down. And what we eventually have with the farthest extent of the Western world is moving further down until everything falls apart. The concept of government falls apart, and we have, I'm not talking about anarchy, I'm talking about globalization and multiculturalism and self-organization, where everything is sort of working from the bottom up instead of from the top down, because top down doesn't work anymore. And we realize that things get much better when you have minimal government protecting your rights, and you have freedom of trade and freedom of religion and freedom of the press. All those different things, right, are very important for the development of the world towards what Nebuchadnezzar can't possibly fathom as working, because everything gets shattered and destroyed, but that's really what brings history to its culmination. And so that was going over several thousand years, but that was the 4 kingdoms. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Going to welcome comments. Let me just see if I can read. I saw some questions here. Okay. 1 second. Something about the bull. Okay. Roman red brings us back to the Babylonian bull, charging forward into demise. You close the circle. Oh, thank you. I don't know how to read your name. Huey Alman? Thank you, Huey. I appreciate it. Okay. Questions, comments are welcome. But thank you very much, and I hope to see you in different museums around the country. I'm around. I'm starting this stuff. So be in touch.
Nachliel, thank you very, very much. This was very informative, and not only the information, but also how you did Google Earth was something, and I didn't know that we can just access museums like this.
I
So
really
in
hope you
terms
take
of the
advantage of it.
content was great, and also the high technology.
Thank you.
Okay, Nachliel, I think it would be great to have the same Zoom meeting, but just for the Israel Museum and/or Bible Lands Museum.
Israel Museum I can do. Bible Lands Museum, I have been in touch with them. They don't have online access like this. They do have several of their exhibitions available, like the Rivers of Babylon and the Valley of David and Goliath on their website. You can explore them, and they're much more adapted to these kinds of tours. You can click on something and it opens up with a video with information. Here, I usually combine, if I were to do the Israel Museum, and I have done it, I combine slideshows which have higher resolution artifacts, because you can look at the artifacts, but you can't always read the text. It depends on the museum and the resolution of the technology where they recorded it. So you have to combine the two. So the Bible Lands Museum does have some exhibits available. You can check them on their website. I'd be happy to do more things like this in the future. I mean, yeah, I'm
Well, I
experimenting.
once did a course with Yad Ben Tzvi, and they took us into the Israel Museum, and they pointed out things I never would have thought of. For example, they had an ancient Egyptian bit of a horse, you know,
Yes.
part of the bridle. And like the tour guide said, this is the kind of bit that the horses would have worn when they went into the Red Sea. Okay, I never would have thought of that. So I would love to have a similar, you know, times 50 kind of a tour of the Israel Museum.
Well, let's make a real tour. Are they reopening? You have to find out.
Yeah,
No, I just
not
need,
yet.
you know, all you need is a PowerPoint of pictures of the artifacts
Right.
and
I
saying
mean,
this is what you're going to see in this room.
these
And-
take many hours to prepare. Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, I can do it, but it's time, it's investment, you know. But I hope to do one. Let's see, you know, how things go. I'm back in the country, so I'm available. Let's put one of them together.
Oh,
Kol
your
hakavod.
father's sense of humor. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you.
Thank you
laughing.
so much.
I don't know why.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing, amazing way to see all those museums. I loved it.
Amen.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We will see you in 2
Thank
days'
you.
time. Please keep looking to see our updates. Nachliel, thank you very much.
Thank
Everybody have a wonderful day today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nachliel was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day,
Very,
Shabbat.
very good.